September, 2021. I was 19, fresh out of my job. We were in the living room at home. It was already late, around 10. There was an open envelope on the coffee table, the one in the middle of the room. My mom was sitting on the couch, just how I left her when I went out. She called me over to sit next to her. On the table, besides the envelope, there was a paper. It was a bank statement, the kind the bank sends every month. She picked up the paper, looked at me with that look she gets when she wants me to do something. She stayed silent for a few seconds, looking at me, studying me. Then she said, in that tone she uses to signal the conversation is over, "It's family money, stop being selfish." She didn't explain anything, just dropped the sentence in the air. I stayed quiet, processing it. Her silence was worse than any yelling. I picked up my bag from the floor, stood up from the chair where I'd sat, and went to my room. I closed the door, but not out of anger. I just closed it. This reminded me of other times. When I was about 16, she took the money from my first job. It was around $300, which I'd saved up with a lot of effort. I wanted to buy a new phone then, one of the simpler ones. She came up with that story about it being for emergencies, that you never know what tomorrow will bring. In the end, she used that money to pay a late electricity bill. She didn't tell me at the time. I found out months later, by accident, talking to my dad. He knew, but he didn't do anything, just shrugged. Then at 17, I worked a whole summer. I saved up $1,200, which was a lot for me back then. I wanted to buy a laptop to use for school, for assignments. She showed up again, said she needed a down payment for a car. She took all the money. She promised to pay me back in 2 months, said it was a loan. She never paid back a dime. The car showed up in the garage a few weeks later. She said it was essential for the family, that I'd understand one day. It always ended like this. I'd be left confused, without the money, without what I wanted. And she'd have the excuse that it was for the family. I'd let it slide, swallow it down. Pretend everything was fine, that it wasn't important. I'd move on like nothing happened. But it did. That night, standing in my room, remembering all of it, I said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Enough. Enough pretending, enough accepting." I opened the computer that was on the desk. I started searching. I needed to find some proof, something that would show I wasn't crazy, that this really happened. I browsed the internet late into the night, looking for statements, receipts, anything. The idea was to find old bank statements, the ones that could show the money trail. I knew she kept everything in a somewhat messy place, so I decided to go to the back of her closet, in the back room, the one she barely used and served more as storage. I opened the door slowly. The musty smell hit me right away. There was an old cardboard box there, covered in dust, full of documents, yellowed papers, old bills. I started rummaging carefully so as not to make too much noise. It was already past midnight, and I didn't want anyone to hear me. There was a lot of stuff in there, but I went straight for the papers that looked more recent. And there they were, the statements. They were kept inside a thick envelope, the kind the bank sends when there's a lot to show. They were from 2021 and 2020, several of them. I opened the first one with slightly trembling hands. There, right in front of me, were the transactions. The transfers were always to her account, from my account. There were 3 in total, exactly the amount I had saved from my job that summer. There was the date, the exact amount, everything recorded. The description that appeared was always the same thing: family loan. Family loan. What a joke. She had taken my money, the money I'd saved with so much effort to be able to study, and had put it in her account with that flimsy excuse. I took out my phone from my pocket, the screen already dim from so much use. I took pictures of each of the statements, focusing on the details, the dates, the amounts, the description. I took pictures of the box, of the other things inside, to document everything. I saved the photos in a secure notes app, which I used to keep important things and which required a password to open. I said to myself in a low voice, "She lied the whole time. She stole from me, and made it seem like it was for the family's good." The next day, still shaken by what I discovered, I knew I needed more. The statements showed the money leaving my account and going to hers, but I needed to prove where that money came from, that it was mine. I went back to her house, with the excuse that I'd forgotten something in my room. This time, I was more direct. I went straight to the drawer where I knew she kept my old pay stubs, those papers that proved how much I worked and how much I earned. There was a lot of old paper there, her old bills, unopened mail. But I started separating them, looking for mine. I grabbed all of them from the last year, which was the period that matched the statements. There were many papers, stacked up. I started putting them all together, separating them by month, organizing them on the kitchen counter, which was the brightest spot in the house. I checked the amounts on the stubs against the amounts that appeared on the statements. Everything matched. Every cent. The money that disappeared from my account was exactly the money I had earned working hours and hours, on weekends, sacrificing my social life. That's when I remembered the car. She bought a new car shortly after the money disappeared. I had seen the pictures she posted on social media, with the caption, "Family Achievement." It was a dark sedan, looked pretty expensive. A friend of hers even commented on the photo, congratulating her on the overcoming. And there I was, with no money to buy a laptop, unable to pay for college properly, while she flaunted a new car with my money. Anger started to rise, but I took a deep breath. I needed more proof. 3 days later, I knew I had to get the school statements, the ones that showed I couldn't pay the tuition. I went to the college website, logged into my student portal, which was still active. I downloaded all the documents I found. They were the registration confirmations for the semesters, but what caught my attention the most were the rejection letters. Letters the finance department had sent saying my enrollment was suspended for non-payment. They clearly showed that I couldn't pay because the money I'd saved had been taken. I saved everything, every letter, every confirmation. The decision to confront her started to form in my head. I decided I would do it the next day. I was leaving the house to buy bread at the corner bakery, and doubt hit me hard. I stood still at the door, thinking, should I really do this? Is it worth the damage it could cause? But then I thought about my future, about what she did to me, about how much she stole my future. She stole my future. I had to have a conversation. I needed to show the proof, lay everything on the table. I grabbed the folder where I'd started organizing everything, and left the house with my decision made. It was one day before her birthday party. That party she always threw, gathering the whole family. It was the perfect opportunity. I spent the rest of the day organizing the proof in the folder. I put everything in chronological order, from the oldest receipts to the most recent statements, the college letters. I checked the amounts again, double-checked everything. I wanted to be sure there were no flaws, no point she could use to discredit me. Everything was ready. It was time to face her. Her birthday party was on Saturday the next day. I spent Friday organizing everything. I took the folder and started arranging the papers in chronological order. The receipts from my first job, the confirmations from the summer work, the bank statements showing the suspicious transfers, the college rejection letters. I checked the amounts again, comparing everything. I wanted to be sure there were no loopholes. Each paper was proof of how my effort had been diverted. On Saturday, the day of the party, my anxiety was high. I knew the moment would be awkward, but it was the best opportunity. The party would start in the late afternoon, and I planned to arrive a little later, when the house was already full. The folder with the documents was ready, hidden under my shirt. I got there around 7 in the evening. She remained silent, her gaze fixed on the papers. I looked her straight in the eye. Here's my bill for this family help. The silence that followed was heavy. She just sat on the couch, defeated. My aunt, my dad's sister, who was nearby, stood up. She picked up the folder, started reading the papers carefully. She looked at my mom, then at me. Nothing was said at that moment. The truth was exposed. I left the party shortly after, without looking back. I went straight to my room. I left the folder there, and tried to sleep. I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The adrenaline from the confrontation had passed, leaving a void. But it was a different void. One that came with the weight of having spoken the truth, of having put an end to years of lies. It wasn't a feeling of victory, but of relief. Like a knot I'd been carrying for a long time had finally unraveled. I left the folder on the bed and lay down. Sleep came quickly, perhaps from the adrenaline, perhaps from the relief. The party continued outside, but for me, Everything had ended in that room. That confrontation was the end of a cycle, the beginning of something new, uncertain but necessary. I knew the consequences would come, but I was ready. The truth had come to light, and that was what mattered. The rest, I would face as it happened. The next morning arrived. The house was still quiet. Most of the guests had already left. I found my aunt in the kitchen, sitting at the table, the folder with the documents beside her. She looked at me, a serious but understanding look. Not many words were needed. I read everything, she said, her voice low. What she did is unacceptable. She told me she'd talked to my dad after the party. He for the first time seemed shocked. I knew he suspected something, but he never acted. Now with concrete proof, he couldn't ignore it anymore. My aunt said she would help me, that we would find a lawyer. She said that, with those documents, we had a strong case. The idea of going to court was scary, but now, with her and my dad's support, it seemed possible. I thought about how all of this would unfold. The prospect of a legal process was frightening, but it was the only way to get some justice. I thought about my savings, about my future that she almost destroyed. That money wasn't just money. It was my effort, my time, my lost opportunities. It was my freedom. The conversation with my aunt was long. She explained the steps we should take. We would need certified copies of the documents, maybe witnesses. I talked about the pay stubs, the statements, the college letters. She wrote it all down, planning the next moves. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The path would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. That day was dedicated to organizing the next steps. My aunt accompanied me to a notary's office to authenticate the documents. The process was bureaucratic, but each authenticated paper was another brick in the construction of my defense. We spoke with a lawyer my aunt knew, a specialist in family law. He reviewed the evidence, listened to my story. He said the case was clear, that we had a solid foundation. He explained the legal procedures, the deadlines, the possible consequences. He talked about the possibility of a settlement, but also about the battle it would be in court. I felt more confident, more prepared. Knowing I wasn't alone in this fight was a great relief. The truth was my weapon, and now, I had professional help to use it. The process began. The following weeks were intense. Letters were sent, notices exchanged. My mother was officially notified. Her reaction was denial, then anger, and finally, a desperate attempt at a settlement. She offered a meager amount, a fraction of what she took from me. But I knew it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about recognition, about justice. My aunt and the lawyer insisted we should go all the way. The legal battle wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I needed to show that no one could steal anyone's future with impunity. This was my fresh start. My fight for the truth. And I wouldn't give up. The court case began, and as expected, it was a roller coaster. The official notice sent to my mother was the trigger. She didn't react well, to say the least. The first phase was pure denial, a blatant, "I didn't do this," followed by accusations that I was making it all up, that I was ungrateful, and that I was trying to ruin her life. The anger was evident, but the evidence we had gathered was irrefutable. Every bank statement, every pay stub, every college rejection letter painted a clear picture. Soon after the denial phase, came the settlement attempt. She, through a lawyer she hired in a rush, offered an amount of money. It was an offer that, frankly, seemed more like an attempt to buy my silence than a fair reparation. It barely covered a fraction of what she actually took from me, of what it cost in terms of lost opportunities. It was almost an insult, a way to try to close the matter without ever admitting the gravity of what she had done. My lawyer, along with my aunt, firmly advised me to refuse. "This offer doesn't reflect the damage," he said, with the seriousness the case demanded. "This isn't just about the physical money she took. It's about the future she prevented you from having. We need justice to recognize that." My aunt, in her firm way, agreed. "Don't accept it, my daughter. You fought for this, you exposed the truth. Your truth needs to be validated." The official refusal of that initial offer seemed to ignite the fire even more. The next stage would be the hearings. The first one happened a few weeks later, and was of palpable tension. I met her in the judge's chambers, the cold, formal environment contrasting with the emotional storm I felt. She sat on the other side of the table, her gaze fixed on mine, a dangerous mix of defiance and desperation. The judge asked me to present my case. I took a deep breath, feeling the silent support of my lawyer beside me, and began to speak. With him guiding the questions, I presented the authenticated documents, explained in detail each statement, each pay stub, each college letter. I spoke about my dreams, about how the money she diverted was my gateway to the education I so longed for, to a future with more possibilities. I recounted the difficulty it was to save every cent, every extra hour of work, every personal sacrifice. When it was her turn, it was a spectacle of reality distortion. She tried to argue that the money was hers, that she had every right to use it as she saw fit. She claimed I was exaggerating, that college was a mere whim, and that I should be grateful for everything she had already done for me. Her lawyer, a woman with a sharp tone of voice, tried to create loopholes, suggesting I was young and didn't know how to manage finances, that there was no concrete proof that the money was exclusively mine. However, the judge seemed focused on the documentary evidence, on the bank statements that clearly showed the transactions, and on my pay stubs that proved the origin of the money. The hearings dragged on. It was weeks of going back and forth to the courthouse, of revisiting painful memories, of exposing my life to strangers. The pressure was immense, and there were moments when the temptation to give up hit hard. The emotional and physical exhaustion was constant. But then I would look at my father, who attended every hearing, giving me unwavering support, and at my aunt, who reminded me of the reason for all of this, and my determination would return renewed. Seeing my father there, firmly by my side, witnessing the truth, was crucial. He, who before seemed indifferent, now saw everything clearly and supported me unconditionally. In one of the hearings, under a meticulous interrogation by my lawyer, my mother, cornered by the evidence, finally admitted, albeit indirectly, that she had used part of the money. She mumbled something about unexpected expenses and small loans. It was a partial confession, but it was recorded. The judge noted the statement carefully. Her lawyer tried to downplay it, minimizing her words, but the admission, however small, was a significant step forward. It greatly strengthened our case, confirming we were on the right track. The final phase of the process was marked by a new settlement proposal, this time more substantial, coming from her side after the partial admission. The offer still didn't fully cover the damages, but it was a more concrete acknowledgement. With the advice of my lawyer and the firm support of my aunt and father, we decided to accept, but with a clear condition. She would have to formally admit the misuse of my money and legally commit to supporting me financially with my studies from then on. It was a compromise. The legal battle was exhausting, and although complete justice was ideal, I also needed peace to move forward with my life and my studies. Finally, we reached an agreement. It wasn't the crushing victory I might have envisioned in my most frustrated moments, but it was a significant victory. She admitted, in legal terms, to having misused my money. A compensation amount was established, and crucially she committed, through a court order, to assist me with my college tuition for the following years. It was a long, arduous, and emotionally draining process, but it taught me valuable lessons about the importance of truth, persistence, and unconditional family support. That agreement didn't erase the past wounds, but it undeniably opened the doors to a fairer and more secure future. Justice, in its own way, had prevailed, and I could finally focus again on my studies, on my goals, without the constant weight of uncertainty about my financial future. That experience, as painful as it was, shaped me. I was no longer just the victim. I was someone who fought for her truth and achieved it, learning the strength that lies in not giving up. After the court settlement, the family dynamic changed drastically. My relationship with my mother became distant, formal. There was no more warmth, no more familiarity. Conversations were short, objective, usually about practical matters related to college, like sending tuition payments. She kept her word, but there was an invisible barrier between us, a coldness that replaced the old closeness. There were no more hugs, nor that knowing look that once existed. It was a necessary distance, a direct consequence of what happened. I didn't avoid her, but I didn't seek closeness either. Trust had been broken deeply, and rebuilding it seemed impossible at that moment. The court settlement was the end of the legal battle, but the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, a phase of cautious coexistence. My aunt and father continued to be my safe harbor, the support that allowed me to move forward. They helped me process the experience, heal the wounds, and focus on the future. With the court settlement guaranteeing financial support for college, I was able to dedicate myself to my studies with more peace of mind. That episode, as traumatic as it was, gave me unexpected strength. I had fought for my truth and emerged victorious. That gave me a confidence I didn't possess before. I re-enrolled, with the money owed to me being used to pay the tuition. Each payment was a small victory, a reminder that I had regained control of my future. The following years were dedicated to my education. I graduated in your field of study, or a generic area like business administration or engineering, with honors. The experience taught me about responsibility, about the importance of financial transparency, and about the need to protect my own interests. I learned that you have to fight for what is yours, especially when it comes to opportunities and your future. Today, my relationship with my mother is cordial, but distant. She supports me in her way, but the deep connection we once had hasn't returned. Perhaps it never will completely, and I've learned to live with that. The important thing is that I moved on, built my career and my life. That broken safe, which once represented betrayal and loss, ultimately became a symbol of resilience and overcoming. The experience taught me that even in the most difficult situations, it is possible to find the strength to fight, to get back up, and to build a dignified future. Justice, even if late and imperfect, gave me the chance to start over. And I grabbed it with all my might.